start. All right. So my name is Axel Feidengruber. I'm from Climate Alliance. We are one of the partners in the crossCert project. Some of you may already know that crossCert is a 3-year horizon project with various European partners, and we are working together to contribute to the success of the next generation of EPCs, so energy performance certificates, by developing and testing guidelines and recommendations. And at the end, we want to improve the accuracy and the usability of those certificates. We want to bring in a more human-centered design and improve the user experience of them. And we want to bring greater homogeneity across Europe, those next-gen EPCs. And especially the last point has a close connection to today's webinar topic, as where the following example will be from Germany, but we experienced a lot of media voices suggesting that reaching a better energy classification for buildings is in some countries connected to a much higher cost than in others, and they portray this as very unfair, and this notion seems to getting momentum. So today we will take a closer look at one of those examples by bringing you one article, or especially one table from an article which was published in the German newspaper Die Welt. I saw in the registrations that not a lot of registrants were from Germany, so Die Welt is a very public German newspaper. You would place it around center right. And my colleague Wolfgang Hofstetter will present the points in this, and the opinions presented in this article. And after that, our project lead, Professor Norberto Fueo from the University of Zaragoza, will give his expert view on the facts provided in this article. I'm sorry, we can go to the agenda. He will provide his expert's view on the agenda, this article. After that, Antonio Gomez, who is also from the University of Zaragoza, will give an inside look on the cross comparison done in the crossCert project on the different EPC methods across Europe, and will present some figures and results from this testing. After hearing from Antonio, we switch from Spain to Austria, if you will, to Nicole Hartl from the Austrian Energy Agency. She will give us a more detailed insight into the reasons why there are differences in these EPC methodologies. And after all those inputs you get, you can finally interact with us, because we will have around 20 minutes, if we stick to our agenda, about with a roundtable discussion, and where we want to hear from your experiences and your ideas for future harmonization efforts. Now at the end, just some basic info before we start. Please generally mute yourself through the webinar so we don't have any background noises. You can please post your questions in the chat. So then at the end, if it's about the presentations from the project partners, we will answer those questions right after the presentations of those project partners. And if you have a question for the round table, just write round table in front of your question, and we can talk about it then at the roundtable discussion. Okay, so and the record of the webinar will be available on the crossCert YouTube channel. So no time to waste, already 1 minute behind. We will go to our first agenda point, Wolfgang Hofstetter from Climate Alliance, about this news article.
Yeah, hello. Some words regarding the background. At the moment, the European Commission is working on a new buildings directive, and they have the target to fully decarbonize the European building stock until 2050. That means all the buildings should be zero emission until this year. This can be reached only if the worst performing buildings in Europe are renovated until then. And I picked a couple of weeks ago from a German newspaper, Axel mentioned it already, this table. I want to explain what it is. In the lines, you see different countries. In the columns, you see different energy efficiency classes. And you see a lot of numbers. The numbers are kilowatts per hour and a square meter and year. What you see here, for example, is that the energy classes G or H have really high numbers, and energy classes like B and C have really low numbers. What we expect from the European Commission will be that we have to renovate the column G or the column H buildings until 2030. They should reach the energy class of the column F, and 3 years later, until the year 2033, even stronger buildings, the worst buildings, should reach the class E. If you look in these numbers, you see there is a wide range of kilowatts in one class. And we in Germany are afraid that we have to expect strict rules. For example, in the class E, we have to bring down our buildings to 160 kilowatts per hour, kilowatt hours per square meter and year. And in other countries like Belgium, they have only to reach 400 kilowatt hours per square meter and year, which means, for example, it may be sufficient in Belgium to renovate a house and just changing the windows. But in Germany, we would have to insulate the house, which is much more costly. And so for me, it sounds like a real big disadvantage for German house owners. And the question is it really like it looks in this table or not? And that's where our crossCert project maybe have some explanations.
Perfect. Thank you, Wolfgang. Before we go on and hear our experts' view on this topic or on this article or on the numbers presented here, we'll have a very short Mentimeter. So please pull out your phones, point it at the QR code, or you can also go to mentimeter.com and I will post it here again, and put in the link 3657-3165. So either go to the QR code with your phone or to the media link here. And then we will now take a look at the results of the question, which is, I hope everything found it. The values for EPC classes in the EU differ strongly between the individual countries. 0 is no agreement and 5 is high agreement. And of course, you have this range of answers, so you can answer from 1 to 5. And oh, I'm sorry, I will share the results with you. So now results are coming in. So you see, okay, we have a lot of high agreement that these values do differ a lot. Okay, we are 29 people here, so we are at around 13 now, not even half. Please make sure to click the link in the comments, sorry, in the chat. Okay, we'll wait just a few minutes. Okay, so it's probably a very clear trend. There's a lot of agreement that these EPC value classes do have not a lot in common between each other. Okay, and a few numbers still coming in. 14, 15, 16, 17. All right. Maybe we stop here and maybe we come back to this. But sorry, I muted myself. So for now, I would like to introduce Norberto again. He's our project lead, and he will now talk about the fact checking and about the facts presented.
Thank you, Axel, very much. Yes, my name is Norberto Fuello from University of Zaragoza, and in the next slide, I'm basically posing the question, which is what Wolfgang very nicely also presented you. It is a question arising out of this table. Let's say superficial for now. Look at this table would conclude that it is much harder to be energy efficient in, let's say, Germany or Austria or even Poland than in other countries, because the energy consumption requirements for a given classification are much more strict in those countries than in other countries. And I think that Wolfgang summarized that very easily, very, very nicely. Now, the question is this analysis correct? Well, we don't know whether it is correct that renovation will be much more expensive in Germany than in other countries, for instance. But we know that certainly this is not supported by the data in the table. So the data in the table is not supporting the argument that the newspaper is making. And that is for two reasons. The first reason is in my next slide, please. And that's that the table is actually listing different quantities for different countries. And those quantities are not homogeneous. For instance, for Austria, we have the heating demand. For Bulgaria, it is the primary energy. For Poland, it is the non-renewable primary energy. But interestingly enough, Poland doesn't actually have currently energy classes. So there's no A, B, C, D, etc. for Poland as of now. So it is interesting that there is in this table from the newspaper. So the next slide, please. Not only these tabulated numbers are not homogeneous, they are different magnitudes, energy magnitudes, but also energy classes are actually defined according to different indicators in different countries. I'll show that in a minute, but the conclusion is that these individual numbers that are being presented in this table do not permit to conclude that some countries are stricter with their energy classification than others. Full stop. That is the conclusion. The table does not support the argument in our opinion. Next slide, please. So what we are doing in crossCert, among other things, is comparing these energy certification methods among different countries. And here you have the situation for the different countries in crossCert. And there you see two things. The first thing is that obviously the indicator on which this energy classification is based changes among countries. For instance, Austria or Bulgaria will use the primary energy consumption, as you can see in the rightmost column of the table. Malta will use the final energy, but Malta doesn't use currently a scale either, like Poland doesn't, for instance. Poland uses the non-renewable primary energy consumption. Slovenia, Greece use also different indicators. For instance, for Slovenia, it is the energy for heating that is used to provide a classification. For Greece is the comparison with a reference building. In the case of Denmark, you can see that the indicator is rather sophisticated. It actually, there is a division there, which involves the heated area. So it is the result of an equation, this classification. So this number are just not comparable. But the question, of course, still stands. That question we could pose in simple terms, for instance, along the lines of, is a C classification for a building in Austria similar to a C classification for a building in Slovenia or in Denmark? That is a valid question, and that is one of the things that we are checking under crossCert. And about those things, my colleague Antonio is going to present you some results from crossCert.
Perfect. Yes, we'll go right through to Antonio Gomez. He's also from the University of Zaragoza, and he will present these results of the cross-testing.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? The next slide, please. So, okay. In which what the cross-CERT experiment consists of? We have certified buildings from one country with the certification procedures of other countries. For example, you can see in the figure that we have certificate Danish buildings with the Polish certification procedure. This seems simple, but this exercise has not been easy. We have had many complications due to the difference in the methodologies, input data required, etc. Nicole will explain later this difference. And what have we compared? We have not only compared the numerical results, we have compared the entire certification processes, how input data are obtained, calculation methodologies, indicators, how the certificate is issued. And thanks to this experiment, we have obtained a comprehensive overview of the certifications processes across Europe and ideas and insights for improving and harmonizing it. It has been a very interesting experiment. Next slide, please. Regarding the today's topic, we presented in this slide some results. In the figure on the left, we compare the primary energy consumption for the same building obtained with different methodologies or methodologies of different countries. As you can see, in general, the primary energy consumption obtained with the methodology of a country differs numerically from the primary energy consumption obtained with the methodology of other country. This was expected, and we will explain that in the next slide. But before that, in the figure on the right, we have observed that the agreement in energy levels was quite well. It has been quite well, and certainly it was a bit unexpected, this agreement of energy levels. What conclusions can we get from this comparison and these results? Next slide, please, Axel. Well, regarding the comparison of the numerical values, we think that is misleading. In the case of the primary energy consumption, the national conversion factors from final energy to primary energy depend on each country, are different in each country. But further, there are many differences in the methodologies. For example, some countries consider energy for lighting, or others exclude it in the calculation of the EPCs. And there are ad hoc assumptions in each country depending on the conditions of the building stock. For example, in the case of Danish certification process, they don't consider wall orientation because they assume that insulation is generally adequate. So they consider a default value for this. So there are many differences in the methodology, and the comparison is misleading, we think. But on the other hand, the direct comparison of energy ratings, it seems that is reasonable. We have found a good correlation between the energy class obtained for the same building with methodologies from different countries. What does mean? It means that a building with a high energy rating in one country would obtain a similar rating in another country, and the same for a building with a low energy category. It was the diagonal in the right graph in the previous slide. This exercise has been carried out for almost 60 buildings across 10 European countries. Certainly, more research effort is needed to consolidate these results, and there are other weaknesses. For example, not all countries have been tested, and we have compared methodologies of countries with similar climates. But despite this, probably we would obtain similar results. Okay, so that's all from my part.
Thank you, Antonio. Right, it's very interesting. Now we will go to Nicole. She will go into the details how these EPCs can differ from each other and what that could mean for the article.
Thanks, Axel. Yes, I will shed some light on the reasons why the current EPC results can't be compared one-to-one from one country to another without looking behind the scenes, because there are differences in the calculation methodologies. The member states calculate their indicators, the different indicators like the heat energy demand, domestic hot water demand, or even final energy and primary energy demand, using their own methodology, calculation methodology, and then they classify the results in the single classes from, like we heard, from A to G or from A++ to H, for example. So there are ranges per class, and they're quite not equal, but quite similar among countries. There are differences, but not that big differences. And the next slide, please. Yes, I have now, I will present you a list of sources of discrepancies in the methodologies. These are the differences in the calculation methodologies, and these are the reasons why we can't compare calculation results from one country to another country without analyzing the background a little bit. For example, one discrepancy is the reference area. In Austria, for example, the reference area is the gross floor area, and in Slovenia, it is the net floor area. So if I divide a final energy demand by a bigger area, then I have a lower value. So that has to be seen. Another point is the user behavior. In some countries, it is possible to change the user behavior according to the actual use of the building. So, for example, you can you can define the occupancy hours. You can define the running times of the ventilation system, the running times of the heating system, the temperatures of the heating system, the occupancy level, and so on. In some countries it is possible, and the result is that you get more accurate or results which are more likely to the actual use. And for example, in Austria, this is not possible. We have a defined user profile per building category or per building type, and we can't change that. So yeah, the buildings are comparable and not that relating to user behavior. But yes, we can't change that. So you have to have that in mind when you compare results. The next point, the consideration of cooling demand and the definition of the air conditioning systems. In some countries, we have the situation that the cooling demand is not calculated for residential buildings, for example. And in other countries, in Greece, for example, if you don't have even if you don't have a cooling system in your building, the system anticipates a cooling system automatically. So that's the other end of the scale. And when it comes to the definition of air conditioning systems, there are different values among different countries which are needed to be fed into the calculation system, like different powers of the fan or the powers of the ventilation, and so on. So there are differences. Domestic hot water is another difference among countries. Some countries calculate or put a value like liters per person or liters per square meter in the system. So there are differences. Regarding the internal gains, we have also differences. For example, in Greece, Croatia, and Slovenia, they do not consider lighting in the EPCs in residential buildings. In other countries, they do. So that's another reason why you can't compare the calculation results one by one. And in Denmark, for example, they have to define the lighting system in every room of the building. Yeah, lighting demand and also the energy for pumping systems. Not all countries have this input in their calculation systems, so some have and some have not. Zoning and integration of systems. Some countries allow, or some calculation systems allow to define several zones. Some just are able to define one zone. And in regard to our nearly zero energy buildings and more efficient buildings, we have several zones or several systems which are running in parallel or which coexist. And this would be a great point or an important point to improve in the calculation systems, to be able to bring in a lot of different systems which are communicating with each other. And this has to be able to see in the calculation programs. The calculation of thermal bridges is also different. Some countries just use one value for the thermal bridges, and others have a detailed calculation of thermal bridges. So there are also differences. The orientation of walls in Denmark, for example, it is not considered. So the orientation of walls is not considered because they see that insulated walls are independent from shading. But in other countries, there are shading factors for walls. In Slovenia, for example, there's another difference. They just have a shading factor of 1 and they can't change that shading factor. In Austria, for example, we can change this shading factor. So another discrepancy among our methodologies. Ventilation rates are different among countries. That has to be seen. And the use of predefined values, this of course has advantages because we can standardize the EPCs a little bit more, and the EPC certifiers can use these default values and use less time for issuing the EPC, so the costs for the building owner is lower. But on the other hand, it is a standard value and may not fit perfectly to the building. So you have to be careful not to use too many of these predefined values. And the last thing is the output parameter or the conversion factors. Like if we look at the UK, they don't have the heat energy demand like we have it in Austria. So we have to be careful when we look at values and at the energy efficiency classes like displayed in this article, because we have to be careful not to compare apples and oranges. We have to compare the same values, so we have to be careful here. And the results themselves, of course, differ because we have different conversion factors, because the energy systems in our countries are different and we have different conversion factors. That's why our primary energy also differs. That's one fact why the primary energy values differ from each other. So these were the main main conclusions or the main findings we had from our cross testings in relation to discrepancies or differences among our methodologies, and all these have potential to be harmonized, of course. Then comparing values would be easier. Yes, but I think this is up to the discussion if this optimal level is likely to have or not.
Thank you, Nicole. That really puts harmonization into a perspective we hear from all these possible deviations, the methodology. So now we will finally come to the interactive part of this webinar. I will stop presenting so we can all see each other. So before we start, we do a little test right now, and I want you all to answer a very basic question for me, and the question is: who of you has been or is working with EPCs? It can be as an issuer or in policy, so that doesn't matter. But you can show by raising your hand. So just go to reactions and raise your hand if you are working with EPCs. So we get a feeling in the room who all is working with them. Yeah, we get a few. Very common. I think you applauded. That's fine, of course, but okay, I think it's about a third of the room, maybe a bit more. So thank you for that short impulse. And this is also the structure where we want to proceed. We're going to ask some questions around. You can always give us some input, and for that, just raise your hand. I lowered mine again, but just raise your hand if you have an input, and then when it's your turn, you can just speak openly. But before that, we don't have any questions to the presenters about their presentations. Now would be your time to ask anything. Okay, then we would go into, I think there's 3 hands still raised. I think do you have an input at the beginning or not, Diana? I saw Günther, you posted a question. We will come to that in a minute. Okay, so we will come to that in a minute. We will maybe start with a question to one of the project's partners, to Carmen Simeonov. You are our Bulgarian partner, of course, and maybe I can put this the slide back on the screen. Bulgaria was one of the highest numbers in this table. Could you maybe go into a reasoning?
Thank you, Axel. I hope you hear me well. I noticed that. Yes, I see the table now. Well, I believe that the authors of this table have made the comparisons between the same building types, because we have different scales for different building types. For example, in Bulgaria, we have 11 different building scales. I think for Bulgaria, this is for residential buildings, the previous scale. Now it's different. We had methodological change in the latest months of last year. But I think if we compare the schools, for example, Bulgaria could be one of the best in this similar comparison. But let's try to answer to your question seriously. I think the main reason behind this are the methodological differences, like my colleagues explained in the previous presentations. I can tell you about a specific difference in Bulgarian methodology, which is really specific only for Bulgaria. We are the only one country, at least among the crossCert countries, which includes in the calculation of the energy class of the building, the electric appliance, the energy for the electric appliances like TVs, like refrigerators, washing machines. This is not the case in the other countries. And as Norberto noticed, our rating is based on primary energy, and our primary energy factor is the highest one in EU. So you can imagine if we have additional final energy taken into account, and if you multiply it by 3 because that was the value of this factor, primary energy factor before, then of course the overall result will rise. Of course, there are many other differences, but this is a very specific one. And I told you that our methodology is changed now since the end of last year. Of course, we insisted to our state several times that this should be changed about the appliances. They should not be part because it's not logical. If the owner is changed, probably the appliance will be changed. And this should not reflect the energy rating of the building. Even we sent such a commentary in the public consultations, and we received a funny answer that the EPBD is telling that all building systems should be taken into account. Probably they think that the appliances are part of the building systems. I don't know. But there are many changes now. The calculation, the energy class is based on the non-renewable primary energy, and the rating, the scale is changed. We don't have A+ anymore, and of course, it is normal to expect that the new scale is determined after deep analysis, taking into consideration how the changes in the calculation methodology will reflect the rating. But we had the chance to make the so-called local cross-testings within the crossCert project. We made it in 3 multifamily residential buildings. We compared the EPC results from the original EPCs, which were prepared according to the old methodology, and we compared the results with the results we achieved with the new methodology, and we were surprised to see that for all buildings, the new energy class is better compared to before, which should not be the case. Of course, this is not a step in the right direction if you want to stimulate the building renovation. It is a big problem. We think, we hope it is not done intentionally, just to report better overall picture of the state of the buildings in the country. And we will continue to insist that this should be changed, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Carmen, for your intervention for Bulgaria. Maybe do we have another country's view on this question? Maybe some input from another audience member or partner? If not, we would go to a question from the audience, from Günther Simanda. If you want to, it's a very interesting question. If you want to ask them yourself, maybe that's better.
Yes, this can be done. Günther
Thank
from
you.
the Austrian Energy Agency. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, so for many years now, the European Union and the CEN standard committees, they are issuing many standards concerning calculation methods for EPCs. And the question is now, so theoretically, the member states should implement these standards, and the differences shouldn't be as high as you have shown there. Do you have an answer for that?
I would give the question to one of my partners. they can provide an answer to you.
I can have a go at answering that if that helps. So I think one of the questions there was why the numbers are so different. And I think, I mean, Nicole had that list of all the different inputs on all the different assumptions that we found across the different EPC methodologies across Europe. And I think sometimes with EPCs, we have EPC rating documents that look similar across countries, and this can give an illusion of harmonization. In actual fact, when you look at the detail of the methodologies, there's very different calculation procedures, different assessors, different assessor training and education background. And so the fact that these models are producing different numbers from different countries isn't a big surprise, actually, once you look at the detail. And I think we need to get back to the idea that the Energy Performance in Buildings Directive is a set of guidelines and almost a philosophy towards how you rate energy efficiency in buildings, but it's not a single methodology. So when we start looking at this table that we started off the discussion with, and the numbers are different, and a B rating in Spain means something different to a B rating in Bulgaria or the UK or wherever else, then this shouldn't be a surprise. We need to think about, well, what are the consequences of that? Is that even a problem? One of the reasons why we're talking about it within crossCert around the harmonization issue is because some of the recommendations for future EPCs, next generation EPCs, assumes or can sometimes assume a degree of harmonization, because we're talking about a new metric or a new output that should be used with a future EPC. But actually, to test that new metric, you don't apply it to a European EPC, you apply it to a UK EPC, a German EPC, a Spanish EPC, and you see how it performs, and you see how it can be integrated into that country. So the differences that we're seeing across the procedures that we've just presented is not a great surprise, actually. It's interesting to find out where the difference comes from, and that goes back to Nicole's list and as partners talking about the different steps that an energy assessor would take, the different assumptions, the different calculation procedure, and tracing back these problems. That's an interesting exercise. But the fact that there's a difference shouldn't be a great surprise.
Thank you, David. I hope that answered your question, or if not, you are obviously allowed to maybe give some answer or to do another question.
Well, as David said, so it's not a big surprise to see the differences, and the list of Nicole really showed the many deviations in the countries. But what I'm wondering is that the EC standards that should be mirrored, that has a methodology for all member states, and this should be mirrored to the national standards, doesn't be more effective. This is what I'm wondering. So over years, the standards have been developed by the European standard committees, and it looks like that the differences in the countries did not overcome. So we have still this many different approaches, methodologies in the national calculations. So this is what I'm wondering a little bit. So I see it in Austria that the EEC standards are not mirrored for several reasons. And my conclusion is that they are also not mirrored in the other countries. And I see now in the new EPBD, there's a new approach for this EC standards. But as long as we have this many differences, it's very, very difficult to compare the EPCs within EC countries. Yeah, that's my conclusion on that. Yeah.
Noberto or Carmen? I think Noberto raised his hand a bit earlier.
Okay, yes, thank you. Just my view on this very important question that Gunther is posing. I think that standardization at the EU level is actually at two different levels. One is the very low level, in my opinion, of standards. I call it low level because it regulates very sort of low level operations, like how do you measure temperature, for instance, how do you measure noise or whatever. So it is very low level. And then there is an effort to standardize as well in the EU by unifying the scales. For instance, the new EPBD apparently now, as it is in the current status, in the current draft, will define the A+ class as a, or the A class, I can't remember now, as a near zero emission building, a zero emission building, actually. And the worst possible class, the G class, will be defined based on the 15% worst performing buildings in the country. So that scale will be more or less homogeneous across countries based on the current status, those 15% worst performing buildings. But then we have this middle ground between categories, A, B, C, and standards. That's where the methods come in. And I think that there the new directive will do very little to provide homogeneity, to be honest. I think that very little will change. So all the things that Nicole highlighted could be very easily reproduced in the new EPCs arising out of this new EPBD. So that's my opinion.
Maybe I can share my opinion here, comment. About the standards, first, the EPBD says that all countries should follow the ISO 52000 groups of standards. I think not all countries have transformed that already. But anyway, these standards have two parts, let's say. One is mandatory part, which should be followed in all calculations. There is another part, the so-called national annexes or annexes A, where every country should make specific national choices. So even after applying these standards, there will be difference because of these national choices. But it should be possible to, if these national choices are known, to make the recalculations and to make the results comparable. That's what I know about the standards.
Dave, you raised your hand.
Yeah, man, it's pretty worth having a lengthy discussion about this because I think it is central to what we do around crossCert. Taking that question maybe to an extreme, if we imagined a situation where there was one single EPC method that all European countries just accepted, so you get given a black box model that runs EPCs, same for every single European country. Would that put us in a better place? Okay, we'd be able to directly compare a building from one country to a building from another country because it would be the same model, the same approach. So they would be literally comparable. But would it be more useful for those individual countries to actually improve the energy efficiency of their building stock? Because you're applying this generic model to countries that have obviously different building stocks, different climates, different markets around retrofit technologies. So one country might not be ready to install 1 million new heat pumps, whereas another country is already doing that. Different cultures around heating and cooling approaches. So and to give you an example, in the UK, we have for all its faults, and there are issues with the UK EPC approach, but it's been developed to be tailored to the UK. So it's focused on heating for residential buildings anyway. It's more focused on heating. It's also focused on the type of energy assessor that we have in the UK. They go through certain training levels, which are relatively, if I can say, quite low in terms of the threshold compared to some other countries. So a UK EPC assessor wouldn't be able to run a Bulgarian EPC assessment. They would require a different level of qualification. So this idea that harmonization is fundamentally a good thing, I think that makes sense up to a point. But there's a reason why all these EPC methods become tailored and focused on an individual country, because that potentially gives more useful and usable information to end users to actually improve their building stock. So I don't think lack of harmonization is necessarily a bad thing in itself. It makes it difficult to compare our buildings, which is what we find in our project, but it's not necessarily a bad thing if an assessment method is very tailored to a particular building stock in a particular country.
All right. Do we maybe have some audience views on the discussion right now? We are almost talking amongst ourselves in the project, so maybe is there someone from the audience who would like to give their view on the matters, or present some views from their home country? There are a lot of people from all around Europe in here, so maybe you could share your experience from your country in that regard. If not, we would just continue. Okay, I don't see anything. So maybe a question for Unisar or for Roberto or Antonio. These next generation of EPCs, there will be a lot more digitization in there. Will this be alone enough to avoid these weaknesses which we currently have in the EPCs we talked about right now? We're talking about right now.
My opinion, and I have read carefully, but not studied them, I should say, the new directive. In my opinion, no, it won't actually. The new directive is technically very complex, I think. Perhaps too much complex. We'll see how the countries implement, the member states implement this directive, but it is very, very complex. And as I said, and notwithstanding Dave's opinion, which I agree with, perhaps there is no point in harmonizing the calculation procedure, but it doesn't do anything to ensure that we are talking here a common language. That's my view. It does set some overall ambitious goals, some common aims, which are adapted to every country, as I said, through this definition of the G category, but it does very little for harmonizing this middle ground where all these discrepancies arise. And again, as David said, perhaps there's no point in doing that, but certainly this directive will, in my opinion, it will not, and it will add layers of complexity, which again, I love to see how countries deal with my own country to start with, but because it is rather complex. For instance, they are integrating life cycle analysis into the energy performance of buildings. Very complex subject. They are trying to forecast the future in terms of, for instance, the primary energy mix 10, 20 years from now, I guess, throughout the life of the building, lifetime of the building. So very, very complex directive, in my opinion, which because of that complexity will perhaps introduce new sources for divergence. That's my opinion. But again, divergence is probably not as bad as we think, as Dave said.
Yeah. Oh, yes, Anne, please.
Yes, thanks a lot. I have also a comment from the German EPCs viewers that states that we should be aware about the technology or the technique we use for monitoring and digitalization, because we need maybe to have so many technique in the building that the gains that we have for saving energy will be reduced. And then I think it's something that we need to have in mind. And also I have a small comment about the article and the number mentioned in this. I think we need also to have in mind that it is something that the media are using to make this transition being slowed down. That's something it needed, and they are not always using logical arguments to keep it more moving forward as fast as it should be. And I think that we need to know which technique this media could use to bring more confusion as clarification.
Well, yes, clear communication of science is always a bit, well, if it's not clear communicated, there's always room for misinformation campaigns, and something which maybe improper harmonization gives a bit of input to the, or it lays a basis for misleading, for misinformation campaigns. So we are right at the end right now, 2 minutes to 4, and we want to go back maybe one more last time to the Mentimeter to do a Mentimeter at the end. It's the same link. You can just refresh the page if you're still on it, and we want to hear from you again. So what is your view? Oh, sorry, is there another question? Okay, no. What is your view again after what you heard, after some of the cross-testing examples, cross-testing results, which Antonio provided with the discussion? Has your view changed a bit? Are you still thinking, well, most of you thought that about around 13 people thought that they do differ strongly between each EU country. Maybe we just want to see if we maybe have changed some minds here. So the link is still in the chat. So you can, as I said, you can refresh the page. You can go to mentimeter.com again. If you want, I can go back here. You can put your camera on this QR code here. Just wait a minute. So we have a little response to our efforts. I will go back to the results. All right. So that looks a bit more balanced. Not that many 5s anymore. A bit more 3, 4s, 2s, even a 1. So Antonio's slides really made an impact then. Okay, maybe we can end it here. But it's very nice to see. So then I would we have exactly 4, so we can end this webinar here. I want to thank you all for your participation, for discussing these very important topics with us. And the recordings of this webinar will be on the project site. So if you missed anything, or if you want to look at the slides again, you can find all this materials there. For any further input, if you are interested in the project, stay on the website, subscribe to the newsletter, follow us on social media, so you can always be up to date. And that is from our side. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.